Korea Economic Institute. My name is Troy Stangerone, and I'm the Senior Director here at the Korea Economic Institute. As many of you all know, Korea is one of the great economic success stories of the last half century or so. Back in the 1950s, it was poorer than many nations in Africa, and today is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But over the last few decades, much of the world economy has changed, and as a good colleague of mine and former senior official in Korea said, the world is much different than when Korea developed. There's much more competition. Exports cannot simply be the only driver of economic growth, and as such, Korea must change as well. And one of the things that we have seen in recent years is an attempt to take and push more innovation within the Korean economy. And one of the key planks of the Park Geun-hye administration's economic platform is the idea of developing a creative economy. And we're fortunate today to have who I think is actually a very excellent speaker to talk about this subject and sort of look at the future prospects for transforming Korea's economy and developing a greater sense of innovation within the economy. And that's Sean Connell. And Sean is somebody who is actually probably one of the first people I met when I moved to D.C. and started working here at the Korea Economic Institute about 8 years ago. Sean, for a long time, was the executive director, I believe the title was, of the U.S. Korea Business Council, and has worked with businesses in the United States and Korea for a very long period of time, perhaps longer than many of us would have expected. But Sean knows, you know, both the business side, the policy side, in the United States and Korea very well. He worked a great deal on the U.S.-Korea FTA and was one of the key people behind the FTA. And so I don't think we could have someone perhaps a better place to talk about this important issue and how Korea moves forward in developing sort of its next stage of economic evolution, if you will, and how trade and other aspects of its economy will fit into that. And with that, I will turn it over to Sean. Thank you.
Well, Troy, thank you for that kind introduction, and thank all of you for joining us here this afternoon. It's a really honor and privilege to be here at the Korea Economic Institute, having attended many of these programs over the years, and would like to thank KAI for its partnership and friendship during the last decade that I've been actively involved with Korea-U.S. economic and trade relations. My presentation today builds on research that I conducted as a POSCO visiting fellow at the East-West Center in Hawaii earlier this year. In recognition of that, I did want to thank Denny Roy and the East-West Center in Hawaii, as well as Satu LeMay and the East-West Center in Washington, where I'm currently a visiting fellow this fall. I'll mention at the outset that the views expressed here are my own and do not represent those of any affiliation with which I am currently or previously affiliated. As Troy mentioned, today I'll be discussing Korea's creative economy agenda that was launched by President Park Geun-hye earlier this year upon her inauguration as president, as a central component of her economic policy agenda. This creative economy focus reflects a deepening recognition of the importance of innovation for Korea's future and sustained growth amid rising social and economic inequities. And it also presents the question of how to foster the innovation that will drive Korea's future prosperity. This question is not unique to Korea. It's one that all advanced economies, certainly here in the United States, that we grapple with. And the ways in which Korean policymakers, businesses, experts, researchers, and others develop answers to these questions will have resonance not just within Korea, but across Asia and really globally. On the one hand, successful policies and initiatives can be shared across borders as best practices. At the same time, with economic integration also accelerating, certainly between Korea and the United States and across the Asia-Pacific region, the policies of one country may impact stakeholders in others in various forms, be it new opportunities for collaboration or unexpected trade barriers. To start the slideshow here. Oh, here we go. To share a brief overview of my presentation before I begin, I'll first discuss the terminology of creative economy and broader concepts as relate to innovation within public policy. Why does Korea need a creative economy agenda if it's already a leader across many sectors in the high-tech fields? I'll explore this question through looking at some elements of Korea's national innovation system and how they intersect with Korea's broader economic context. Korea's current economic conditions have been discussed in quite some detail recently here in Washington by a number of experts, including Vice Minister Yoon Jong-lok of the Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning, who was here recently in Washington, as well as the president of the Korea Economic Research Institute, Dr. Chae Byung-il. And they've focused on many of the economic and broader issues. I'll take a little bit of a separate approach, as you'll see, maybe looking more at some of the ways in which innovation is quantified and measured and the implications of that. And so, as not to cover too much of the same ground, I will, be sort of brief in talking about some of these issues, demographics, and some of the other issues I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Although it's somewhat early to assess the creative economy policies, and my understanding is that many of the proposals that the administration has rolled out are currently awaiting approval in Korea's National Assembly even now. I wanted to share some observations and points to consider as these policy initiatives and proposals move forward over the next few months and years. In many respects, there's quite a bit of continuity with efforts that previous Korean governments have made to help bolster science, technology, and innovation as a means of promoting Korea's growth. What is significant is the Park administration's decision to really position innovation in the form of this creative economy agenda front and center on the economic agenda in a way that arguably few major economies have really done anywhere. And I would contend this is a very positive and encouraging action looking ahead. At the same time, longer-term success is likely to be contingent on addressing more fundamental and structural issues within Korea's economic context and innovation framework. And I'll discuss some of these over the course of the presentation, after which I'm very much looking forward to our discussion on these topics. So let's begin with the term creative economy itself. I've made some visits to Seoul earlier this year and have had the chance both in Korea and here in the United States to speak with a number of experts and people from the business community about the creative economy agenda. And certainly in the spring, but even more recently, one of the answers I've often gotten is, well, nobody knows what it means. What is creative economy? We don't know yet. I would point to President Park's comments during her inauguration speech to give one sense of clarity, and that being she explained her idea for creative economy as the convergence of science and technology with industry, the future of culture and industry, and the blossoming of creativity in the very borders that were once permeated by barriers. And if the term itself may be a little bit ambiguous depending on who the audience is, the goal is very clear, and that is new job creation. President Park has closely linked the creative economy agenda with the goals of raising Korea's employment rate to 70% and also promoting economic democratization, including by boosting small and medium enterprises, which I'll refer to as SMEs moving forward. Also, the focus that President Park has made, both in her inaugural address and in comments since then, has really, there's been a focus around the convergence of information and communication technologies with various industries, both manufacturing, services, as well as content and culture. And this is, it's helpful to consider how this relates to broader concepts and definitions and research around innovation, which I'll be speaking to first off. I wanted to first share the OECD's definition of innovation because I think it showcases just how broad innovation is. Oftentimes, in conversations I've had in the U.S. and Asia about innovation, people often think of a very narrow image of high-tech startups in Silicon Valley, and certainly that's a big part of some of the most exciting innovation going around, but that's not the only thing that innovation constitutes. And the OECD has defined it as implementation of a new or significantly improved product, a good or a service, or a process, a new marketing method, or a new organizational method in business practices, workplace organization, or external relations. And one of the important things about this definition, as I mentioned, is its breadth, encompassing new ways of doing things both in tangible form and also in intangible form. And intangible assets is a really interesting aspect and something to think about in considering innovation policies. What are intangible assets? For example, computerized information, software and databases, innovative properties such as research and development, copyrights, trademarks, design, other intellectual property, and then economic competencies, including brand equity, firm-specific human capital, networks, tacit knowledge, marketing, and so on and so forth. And in recent research that the OECD has conducted, they've noted that investment amongst the United States, European Union member economies, and Japan, investment in intangible assets is increasingly overtaking investment in traditional capital. And also that this investment in intangibles generated as much as 18% of growth in multi-factor productivity in the U.S. between the late 1990s and early 2000s. I'll come back to this topic a little bit later because it does have important implications for Korea's creative economy agenda and some of the things that President Park is trying to accomplish. Just briefly, two related concepts are competitiveness and national innovation systems. Here are a couple of example definitions of these. And one can say that national innovation systems catalyze innovation into competitiveness. Citing a recent related U.S. National Research Council report, quote, "If competitiveness can be defined as the ability to gain market share by adding value better than others in the globalized economic environment, the ability of these actors to collaborate successfully within a given innovation system gains significance." Building on these definitions are some fundamental questions that are important to consider in approaching and developing public policies around innovation. First, what are core elements of innovation-focused growth policies? There's been extensive discussion and research on this topic, certainly here in the U.S. And worldwide. And there's general consensus that's evolved and formed around the importance of not just science and technology and research and development policies, but also the broader framework and innovation ecosystem. So what does that incorporate? Well, certainly research, education, infrastructure, both physical and regulatory. And then a set of policies, several which I've listed here, labor policy, tax incentives and tax burdens, financial policies, trade and investment, intellectual property, standard-setting processes, administrative burdens, which is a very big deal for small and medium enterprises and entrepreneurs, and then all of the interactions among them. And I would also add the not listed here, government procurement, of which there's quite a bit of study that's been done in the U.S. about the important role that government can play as a first mover of innovative technologies and helping to bring these to market. I'd also note, too, that other actors, well, actors, certainly government, businesses of all sizes, large, medium, small, and startups, universities and research institutions, non-governmental organizations also play an increasingly important role. A couple of good examples being the Gates Foundation, which is investing millions of dollars into research around global health issues and other areas, as well as groups like the Kauffman Foundation here in the U.S., which is working both domestically and with international partners to promote entrepreneurship. Building on this, the second question are, what are the most effective roles for public policy to encourage innovation as a driver of economic growth? And again, this is another area where there's been considerable discussion in various policies that countries around the world have used to various degrees of success over the years. But there is, I would say, growing consensus again in the research and among experts about the importance governments can play in being facilitators or coordinators of innovation, shaping the environment, the framework conditions, making strategic investments versus picking winners and national champions. Again, these are, issues that certainly we grapple with here in the United States at various levels, but are helpful to keep mindful of in looking at the approach that Korea is also taking. So Korea today, I think everyone would agree, is an advanced high-tech economy. Made in Korea is increasingly seen worldwide as a mark of high quality. And sometimes in conversations with friends and colleagues here in the United States, I hear people say they think Korea is more innovative than the United States these days. Creative economy agenda in Korea. This is one of a number of statistics I'll be showing you that comes out of the OECD's Science, Technology, and Innovation Outlook, which is a great compendium of data amongst the OECD member countries on a number of innovation components and ways of measuring innovation. And this graph here shows an overview of Korea's national innovation policy mix in a few areas. And I wanted to highlight through this and some of the other charts I'll be showing in a moment, some of the aspects of Korea's national innovation system is measured according to these benchmarks, as well as some of the ways in which Korea's system is quite strong, but also some of the areas that have implications for its economic trajectory. As you'll see in these figures, and I'm sorry this is horizontal, it's a little bit more difficult to read that way, but you'll notice that there is that the mix of research and development in Korea is much more oriented towards applied research, the process and the incremental innovations, than basic research, some of the original creative research that kicks off the innovation process. The data I'm going to share is probably not going to come as much of a surprise. R&D in Korea is primarily conducted by the private sector. In fact, 3/4 of R&D in Korea was private sector in 2010 as compared to public sector or university. Of this research and development, 88% was in the category of manufacturing, and of that, 48% was just in one category, that being radio, television, and communication equipment. And there was a very interesting graphic that was in, I believe, the Korea Herald yesterday. There was a picture of an apple, and it showed just the huge trade surplus that Korea has built up over the last decade in information and communication technology products, where most other industry sectors in Korea have actually run trade deficits. So it's these figures, and I'll show you this is another good graphic of this. Information and communication technologies are in the middle. Korea is the white column. The OECD median is the dark blue, and you can just see how Korea is far ahead of everyone else. And this is a measurement of patents. In comparison, to the left, you'll see bio and nanotechnologies. To the right, you'll see environment-related technologies. Particularly bio and nanotechnologies are a field where basic research is very important. And this is an area where Korea drops a little bit beyond the median, which I'll get back to a little bit later. Korea also has been making significant investments in research and development. I believe that after the 2008-2009 financial crisis, Korea was only two member countries of the OECD that actually increased their R&D expenditures, and I believe the number was 3.7% in 2010. So Korea is performing quite well, as you can see in this comparison with other countries. This is just government appropriations for R&D. And then business as well. Again, Korea ranks quite highly. These figures that I'll show you over the next couple of slides offer some additional perspectives on important aspects of Korea's innovation infrastructure. The columns to the left, again, will not come as a actually skipping ahead to this side. The columns to the left here, Internet for Innovation, again, will not come as a surprise to anyone here. Korea really is a global leader in its internet infrastructure, its number of broadband subscribers and access. The last two columns, or the columns to the right, which focus on human resources and education, point to Korea's high levels of university graduates and college-educated people, and also the strong performance of Korean students on international assessments of math and science, something that President Obama has spoken of quite often during his term about the strength of Korea's education system. The last two columns, in contrast, point to lower doctoral graduation rates in Korea in science and technology fields, and also engineering, which came as a surprise to me when I first saw this, as well as science and technology-related occupations and total employment. Also in the center section, the two columns to the right note low levels of international collaboration in patenting and in co-authorship of journals. And I'll get back to this in a moment, but this reflects, as will some of the other statistics, one aspect of Korea's innovation system, which is a lot of research and development in Korea especially that conducted by the private sector, is done in-house by companies that have the financial and technological resources to do this on their own without collaboration, be it domestically or internationally. Related to that, an important question with R&D in Korea is who does it and in what fields? And this is a very interesting schematic, this radar graph, and I think I don't need to explain a whole lot here. There's a bulk of R&D in industry, especially high-tech manufacturing. At the same time, R&D conducted by SMEs and in services sectors is extraordinarily low. The SME R&D rate has increased. The 2005 rate is that dotted line you'll see, and so it's grown a little bit. But you can see the gaps between large firms and small firms, between manufacturing and services. And these various indicators, they're only part of a much broader story about Korea's innovation capabilities and Korea's economy, reflect aspects of Korea's national innovation system that are today presenting constraints towards Korea's economy and future growth. And these take on increasing importance at a time of growing regional competition as China and other economies in Southeast Asia move up the innovation and value chain themselves. And when there's increasing consensus in Korea that Korea has succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations in its fast follower model, and now to maintain that competitiveness, Korea needs to make that leap and accelerate its transition to being a global innovation leader across many fields, creating new industries, new technologies, new business ideas. Korea's potential growth rate per capita has been slowing and has been slowing fast. I believe it slowed from about 9 or 7% in 1995 to a present level near 4%, and there are some projections that this growth level is probably going to decelerate to about 2% during the 2030s. And this decline reflects a decrease in productivity and labor inputs, which has both structural and demographic roots. And as I mentioned, some of the many experts from Korea that have been in town recently have discussed these topics in detail. What I'll mention is that some of the contributing factors include Korea's inflexible labor market, which reduces employment mobility across sectors, public, private, academic, and research. And it's also created an increasingly dualistic system of regular employees and non-regular employees that lack the wages, the job benefits, the job protections, and also training opportunities of regular employees, a topic that I'll get back to in a moment here. When it comes to productivity, what are some of the innovation-related constraints, and what are these indications symptomatic of? First, the emphasis on applied research, the low levels, comparatively, of R&D conducted by universities, small businesses, and in the services sector, and also the low levels of international collaboration, again, reflect some aspects of Korea's system, that being a lot of R&D being conducted in-house by vertically integrated large companies. And with these large companies, vast in-house knowledge and resources, both intellectual and financial, and a lot of trade amongst large company conglomerate family firms. And one of the effects of this is that small and medium-sized businesses, primarily serving a supplier and subcontractor role, may not have full opportunities to develop their own innovative capabilities or to partner with large companies in developing and then commercializing new technologies and processes. This is often the case here in the United States. And over time, this has led to significant productivity and wage gaps. I believe that what a really interesting statistic is that SME wages are about 62% of those of large companies, and service sector wages are about 55% of those in Korea's manufacturing sector. Also, SMEs are estimated to have about 35% of the productivity of large companies, and that figure is even lower when you move to the manufacturing sector. And this has been reflected just over time as the gaps have increased. This has really fed into some of the recent debates on economic democratization that played a very important role in the 2012 presidential elections in which President Park was elected. I'll mention, though, briefly that research and development is not the only factor at play, and I wanted to return to intangible investments. This graph doesn't include Korea, but shows some interesting visuals for one way to look at this. And the in these columns, the topmost color is basically intangible assets in terms of brand equity, firm-specific human capital. And you'll see at the far right, the U.S. and the United Kingdom have a very large amount of investment in those areas. If you look towards the left, you'll see Japan, which for its overall level of investment being quite high, the investment in intangibles is quite low. And this is interesting because during the period in which this is covering, basically the mid-90s through about 2006, this was a period in which there was significant growth and stellar performance by many U.S. companies pioneering new technologies, innovative business models. And it also gets to a question that comes up a lot as to, what are some of the reasons why Japan, for all its assets and investment, has really struggled in some of these areas over the last 20 years. And to cite some recent research that's not referenced in the academic paper by professors Fukao and Kwan, who are connected with Hitotsubashi University in Japan, they've done some extensive work examining factors in Japan's slow economic growth during the last 2 decades. And one factor that they've pointed to is significant underinvestment in intangible assets. And this includes underinvestment in information and communication technologies in the services sector, which has implications for productivity. And one thing they'll point to is that, for example, during the last 20 years, there's been significant underinvestment in some major service sectors in Japan, including resale, wholesale, and transportation, which are larger sectors than the ICT producing sectors in Japan. And that if this resulted from a reluctance in those sectors to reorganize business structures, make those investments in information and communication technologies, and also to train and retrain workers, there may be some linkages also with the increase in non-regular workers that in turn relates from some of Japan's labor market structures that are very similar to those in Korea. I'll briefly mention also some indicators that relate to entrepreneurship, which is a very hot topic everywhere these days. And President Park has spoken quite a bit about the importance of entrepreneurship in driving the creative economy. And the Global Entrepreneurship Model, or Monitor, is probably the largest worldwide survey of attitudes amongst people towards entrepreneurship and starting a business. And there's some interesting aspects about attitudes in Korea, which you'll see in the middle row here, which is that views towards entrepreneurship, either as a good career choice or high status accorded to entrepreneurs, is actually comparatively high. But in terms of people's own perceived opportunities, their perceptions of their own skill sets, and also fear of failure, the tone's a bit more negative. And this parallels, and this certainly has been a topic of a lot of press coverage, not just in Korea, but here in the U.S., of Korea being a challenging environment to be an entrepreneur, to start a new business in. And while there's been some very positive news recently about a number of startups and Korean startups coming to the U.S. to meet with investors and venture capitalists in Silicon Valley to pitch their products, a topic that's come up again and again in conversations I've had in Seoul with people across all aspects of business and research is that there are a lot of cultural and social pressures in Korea for young people to pursue very stable careers with large companies, with government, and not to take the risks involved in starting up a new business, particularly because if you start a business and you don't succeed, it's very, very difficult to get the kind of support you need to start again, to try again, and some stigma that comes with failure as well. Some additional ones here. Just to mention a couple of other structural challenges that have come up. Some of the indicators I showed point to weak linkages amongst universities, industry, and government, which has been considered a very important factor to the success of areas including biotechnology here in the United States. And this again reflects some of the aspects of how R&D is conducted in Korea, as well as the limited labor mobility for researchers across various sectors. Here, I think we take for granted that people have the mobility to move from research labs to both in universities and federal government to industry and back. This is very, very challenging to do in Korea. And I would say none of these are new issues. These challenges have been recognized for a long time by many experts in Korea, going back to the 1980s and 1990s. There have been many efforts by previous Korean governments to try to address these issues. And that's one of the things that I think is really important about the Park government's focus on creative economy and its decision to put this really front and center on its agenda during its first year in office. How to address some of these challenges? What I have listed here are some of the best practices that are often cited by international experts, by research groups, that really look at some of these questions. As you'll see here, some of these will be reminiscent of what you may have heard about the Korean government's creative economy agenda. Promoting innovation through accelerating the use of information and communication technologies, more investment in intangible assets, including increasing inbound foreign direct investment, increasing labor mobility and workforce training, deregulation, tax cuts and incentives, trade agreements, organizational reforms within companies, and also increasing within the workforce the participation of women, senior citizens, immigrants, and also eliminating entry barriers for entrepreneurs and small companies. Many of these resonate in a lot of what the Park administration has put forward during its first months in office. What I have here at the top, some of you may remember from the when President Park took office, and there were 140 policy tasks that the administration rolled out. And number one on that list was a job-centered creative economy. And this included the strategies that are listed here on the slide, as well as a list of 41 related tasks, many of which have since emerged in the broader creative economy agenda that the government has rolled out. On June 4th of this year, there was a Creative Economy Action Plan that was announced. To share a very brief summary, because this is explained in some detail in the broader, the academic paper that's available for you. The plan targets creating new employment in industries based on creativity and innovation, strengthening Korea's global innovation leadership and competitiveness, and creating more openness in Korean society towards creativity. The plan incorporates 6 strategies to achieve these goals. These include establishing an ecosystem that promotes the creation of startups, strengthening the role of startups and small and medium enterprises, enhancing their ability to enter global markets, generating new industries as growth engines, fostering world-class creative talent, and then strengthening Korea's science and technology capabilities, as well as promoting a creative economic culture. There was a related proposal that came out a few weeks before then, titled Measures to Develop a Venture Startup Funding Ecosystem. And this comprised a very large part of the plan that came out later in June. And these measures, which are summarized here on the slide, focus on eliminating financial and regulatory barriers, particularly towards entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises, with the goal of creating in Korea a Silicon Valley-like environment of funding, a venture funding ecosystem where, for example, successful entrepreneurs reinvest in new startups and you have a virtuous cycle going. One of the key aspects of this plan is a focus on investment over loans. And back during the late 1990s, there was actually a bit of a startup boom in Korea under the Kim Dae-jung administration. But much of this financing at that time was focused around loans versus investment. And then when the dot-com bubble burst here in the United States, it had resonant effects in Korea. And so the Park administration has spoken quite openly about the importance of, rather than loans, focusing on investment to reduce the risk, just the risk involved in that, the availability of startups to be able to repay the money, and also to reduce dependence on public funding. Within these measures, some specific proposals include tax incentive, deregulation that's intended to help encourage angel investors to make these investments in startups. There is a crowdfunding scheme that's been proposed similar to what was approved here by Congress last year in the United States. Also establishing new funds, which has been a very heavy part of focus in the previous few months. And then removing regulatory barriers towards mergers and acquisitions that relate to technology. As mergers and acquisitions are tough in the Korean market. Another interesting aspect of these proposals has been the incentives that cross Korea's borders, and these include, for example, encouraging Korean investors overseas, and business overseas to invest in and provide mentorship to startups in Korea, also to encourage highly skilled foreigners to start businesses in Korea, and through an entrepreneur visa, similar to what countries such as Chile have done quite successfully. Some of the other major actions include the establishment of the Ministry of Science, Information Communications Technology, and Future Planning earlier this year. Other topics that the Korean government has discussed beyond the focus on entrepreneurship and the funding cycle include a proposal to increase funding in basic research by 40% by 2017, improving the linkages between universities, industry, and government to foster, again, good synergies for innovation, improving and strengthening the infrastructure around intellectual property, promoting convergence, again, with information communication technologies and other industries, and then strengthening the software sector, including promoting big data analysis and cloud computing. There's also discussion in the plan about increasing government procurement opportunities, especially for small and medium enterprises. There are some set-asides that have been proposed that are similar to the SBIR program here in the United States. And while there's not a whole lot of detail in the creative economy plan related to the education sector, there are proposals that include exposing students to successful entrepreneurs for mentorship opportunities, promoting extracurricular activities to encourage entrepreneurship, and some other proposals along those lines. Some of the other things the Park administration have done include pretty active public outreach, really from the very beginning. President Park and members of her administration have done many site visits to successful startups in Korea. They've had very high-profile meetings with a number of famous entrepreneurs, Bill Gates, Larry Page of Google, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and some others. And so there's been a very active public outreach component. There's also been a lot of focus in proposals about the importance of upgrading small and medium enterprises, increasing protections for them, better enforcement of competition policies, as well as providing incentives for universities, students, and others to seek employment with small and medium enterprises, which is a big challenge. At a time when SMEs cannot fill jobs, and yet there's very large and growing unemployment amongst recent Korean university graduates. What are the prospects for success? Well, we're still just a few months into the Park administration's tenure in office. As I mentioned, many of the proposals that have been put forward so far are still awaiting approval by the National Assembly. So it's a little premature to assess, well, how is this creative economy initiative performing? Park has described the agenda as a paradigm shift, which is really what's going to need to happen for the agenda to move forward. And that also includes changing public mindsets about what constitutes success. Ensuring an enabling environment for innovation that doesn't hold back unexpected and unanticipated surprises is also going to be important. At an early stage, I would suggest there's about 3 areas, very broadly, where leadership by the Park administration is going to be really valuable for building momentum for the creative economy agenda. The first of these is not to lose focus on creating the most conducive environment possible for innovation. The focus on SMEs and on entrepreneurs and boosting the services sector addresses some important parts of Korea's economy and national innovation system that haven't achieved their full potential. And broader and more fundamental regulatory, tax, labor mobility, and other reforms, especially in the services sector, that encourage both large and small businesses to increase their investments, bring on new employment, and increase their capabilities, is going to be beneficial. Also important are going to be tackling unfair business practices that have been a challenge in Korea, but at the same time, ensuring that incentives for small and medium businesses are successful and don't create dependency or disincentives for them to grow and expand. President Park has spoken about the importance of deregulation as key to fostering the creative economy, but there's been some coverage that actually the numbers of regulations have increased quite rapidly just in the first few months of her administration. So it's important to be mindful of not just the what's being deregulated, but also being mindful as new regulations come forward. Is there what could be the unanticipated effects of those regulations? The Park administration should also be mindful of the limitations of government's role and ability to shape the creative economy, including market interventions, be it regulatory or others, that could provide unexpected barriers. A couple of examples of this, many of you may have seen the recent Washington Post article about the rules about ActiveX software in Korea, and how over time what's happened is for people to make online payments in Korea, they can only do so through Microsoft Internet Explorer and not other search engines. Another example from a few years ago was the Wireless Internet Protocol for Interoperability standard, which the WIPI standard, which in effect for a couple of years shut many of the first wave of smartphones out of Korea's market, and then that standard was changed a couple of years later as smartphones grew in popularity. A second area is trade and foreign direct investment, which has interestingly not been so strongly emphasized until recently by the Park administration in talking about economic targets and goals. And I'd note that several elements of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, including eliminating market entry barriers, strengthening IP protection, increased transparency, and enhanced competition policies, have been identified as keys for strengthening Korea's services sector. And full implementation of the Chorus FTA and the regulatory reforms it incorporates will support the creative economy agenda and benefit innovative Korean businesses, again, by moving forward these reforms, reducing burdens, and fostering a more competitive market. It'll also provide new opportunities for innovative Korean small and medium-sized businesses to enter into global markets, similarly with the Korea-EU FTA. And then third, communicating the importance of innovation. Again, the Park administration's got off to a very strong start with this in its public outreach. And this is going to be important because in order to tackle some of the really sensitive reforms, be it education, labor, and social welfare and safety net, again, these are not new issues, and many governments over the last couple of decades have struggled with trying to move forward and implement these reforms. And changing mindsets amongst the public and framing it in terms of, what needs to be done to advance the creative economy is going to be really important to building an environment in which some of these changes and reforms can be made. So for managing public expectations and also for building interest amongst the broader public and enthusiasm for these goals is going to be really important over the course of President Park's term. A lot of these things are longer term, have longer term payoffs. How much of these will create measurable results during Park's 5-year term is a very good question. It would be the same here in the United States. So helping to look at this as sort of a long-term project is going to be really important for success. But with that, I'll stop. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Sean. That was a very excellent presentation of sort of the challenges Korea faces, where Korea's at now, and where it's looking to go in the future. One of the things that sort of stuck out to me was, early on when you were talking about innovation, you note that, there is a high level of R&D in Korea, but a lot of it is, in the private sector right now, and much of it is not basic research. And, there's a couple of themes and things that stick out to me when you consider that, which is that, if you look sort of, and I guess in some ways we're all sort of bound by our own experiences and where we come from, but, in the United States, private R&D was actually very successful. Bell Labs was highly successful for a long time with many innovations that came out of there, new products. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the government side. But also, if you look, much of the innovation in the U.S. also came from the U.S. Government's R&D, but specifically oftentimes in areas like, military development or space development. A lot of the products that are developed, sort of like the internet from DARPA and other things came out of that. But also that, I guess the reason basic research is important, one of the more interesting articles I once saw was that, when the laser was first invented, nobody knew what you could do with it. It seemed to be just a toy. But now much of the modern economy and technology is run off laser technology. So oftentimes, things that we don't seem to be practical become highly relevant to future growth and innovation. So I guess the question to me would be, when you look at sort of how it doesn't necessarily matter if it's public or private. The question is how are you doing basic and how are you applying it? But how does Korea then move sort of beyond? You said 88% of it was on manufacturing. So when I've talked to people before, the discussion often that Korea is actually very good at sort of process innovation and improving systems and things. How does Korea, using what President Park has put forward, or even beyond that, move towards innovation beyond manufacturing, or that ties manufacturing, together with services and other future technologies?
That's a really good question, and a very broad one. And I think the part of it will depend on. I think there's quite a bit of research that's going on in Korea in many sectors. Certainly at KAIST and some of the other centers that do focus on healthcare technology. There's one interesting fact has been that many multinational companies over the last few years have established regional R&D centers for Asia within Korea, reflecting the very strong human capital and talent and know-how and skills there. Strategic investments, certainly would be helpful. And, again, this is looking at the public sector side. For private sector, I think it will depend on what new business models, new ideas that companies are able to introduce. Some of though I am not too familiar with these particular businesses, I've noted a lot of discussion recently about services like KakaoTalk, some of the social media initiatives are starting to come up in Korea. It'll be interesting to see how these succeed, and also whether they'll be able to go global, which I bring up because for many years, of course, within Korea, at a time when Google and Yahoo were taking very large, not just in the U.S., but global market share, in the Korean market, it was Naver and Daum and other Korea-specific search engines that really dominated the market. And while I think maybe one or two explored going beyond Korean borders, I forget which one acquired the U.S. search engine Lycos at some point a few years ago. It hasn't really gone so far. So, if there are, look, especially in the case of Korea, it's not just what's good for the Korean market, but also what's going to be globally successful. And I think those are going to be some factors into, beyond the research investments that are made, which are not just in ICT, but if you look at public sector, there's a lot of other research going on. Going back about 10 years ago, Hwang Wong-suk's work at Seoul National University on cloning. But what will be sort of the successes and factors, probably in a very unexpected way, that will show and demonstrate that the opportunities and successes by investing in services and providing some new ways in which Korean companies can benefit through services and taking them global.
Yeah, and I think that global aspect is the key. That to be successful, it's going to have to be not focusing on the Korean market, but the global market. All right, we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience now, as this covers the entire range of the economy. I'm sure there's plenty of things we could ask Sean. We have microphones on either side, and if you would just take in. Please identify yourself before your question, and then try to keep your questions short and precise. Thank you. Lady right here.
Hi, hello. I'm Kyung-sun Kim. I'm a business scholar to George Mason University, and I'm originally government official of the Ministry of Labor in Korea. Thank you for sharing. It's so impressive presentation. My question is about your suggestion. You suggested the tax cut and increasing labor mobility as a way of solving our challenges. But however, I wonder, tax cut is nowadays we have every country have a very severe wealth polarization problem, and welfare system is very important to us. But in this situation, I think the tax cut is not is that the option the government can choose easily? And also the increasing labor mobility, that means the decreasing the job security or job securities. But however, the workers, if they do not have any security, I think it's also the innovation is not working well. So how do you think about that?
Well, thank you very much. These are very good and very important questions. And I'll speak to tax cuts first, and then get into the labor mobility, because that's a really sensitive area, as you mentioned, as I mentioned as well. Some of the specific tax cuts ideas that have come up in the creative economy agenda, as announced by the Park administration, many are focused around what are the kinds of things that would encourage the companies to invest in startups. In what ways can successful entrepreneurs, in what ways can large companies, in what ways can other groups be incentivized or be what would increase their motivation to make these investments in brand new companies, activities by entrepreneurs. And so a lot of it's focused around, I would say a lot of what's come out recently has been focused around that, beyond traditional tax incentives. They're intended to encourage companies to increase research and development. It is a fair question. And at the same time, it's also I haven't really seen in other countries anyone stepping back from tax incentivization as one means to try to encourage these sorts of activities. But there is also the question of how do you measure performance too? Are there sunset provisions that will be linked with these tax incentives? I can't speak to that in the case of Korea. I know this is something that comes up in state and local contexts, if not the national context here. But it does get to an important point. How will the incentive be effective in encouraging the growth, or at a time when demands and costs for social safety net, for welfare and other issues is more strained? Can governments really afford to do these sorts of things? It's a matter of debate. With labor mobility, one of the challenges that certainly I've heard about a lot over the years, speaking with people in Korea, is the issue of a limited social safety net, and this has been quite well documented. It's well known. And what are some of the things that would make labor mobility easier, or what would help facilitate that in Korea, both not just from an employer's perspective, but also from the perspectives of labor and employees, and enhancing the social safety net. Some of the proposals that have been made over the years by various groups and experts include pension portability. Reducing, from an employer's perspective, one of the factors in the growth of non-regular workers, which I think the latest statistics have maybe as much as a third, if not more than a third, of Korean employees being non-regular workers. One factor has been that it's very difficult for companies to let go of employees at times when they need to do that. Obviously, this is very sensitive because it also relates to what's a social safety net if a person loses their job. How easy is it for them to find a new job in an environment where many companies aren't hiring because it's too difficult to fire their employees? So enhancing the social safety net, addressing some welfare issues, improving the portability of pensions. Korea does have a national health system, which is a helpful factor. But addressing labor and addressing labor mobility issues, I think, are going to require this broader outlook at what's the broader infrastructure, especially at a time when there are growing gaps, when there are growing inequalities, at a time when Korea's growth is also slowing. So these are very good and very important things, I think, to think about, and thank you for raising them. Yeah, Florence.
Florence Lowley from
Global America Business Institute. Sean, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
One question is that Korea is one of the fastest aging society in the world, and it has become a social issue. how this creative economy would help with the aging population, because when you think about, maybe I don't have a clear understanding of this creative economy, but creative economy somehow sounds like creativity, younger, innovation. It does not feel very equated with the aged population. So how would this help with aging population and their job security? Thanks.
Thank you, Florence. It's a wonderful question, and there are a few ways that you can approach this. One is from the role of the aging population, senior citizens, and the other is both from their own participation as well as around services that could be supportive of them. There's been some interesting research. I saw something in The Economist about this last year, about the important role in many countries that older entrepreneurs are taking. I think there's often this image of the young recent college kids or dropouts working out of garages that come up with some great Steve Jobs and the Apple computer and Bill Gates and Paul Allen of Microsoft. This is a very popular image, but I think the statistics show this. And I can't give you the number, unfortunately, but a growing number of retirees, of older people are starting, new businesses, new firms. The number is going up. And these are people who have decades worth of expertise and experience, and also networks. They're institutional networks, they're people networks. So in Korea's case, especially as I believe the retirement age is a little bit early, but people's lifespans are getting much longer. Obviously, people, once they retire from their jobs, have, in many cases, many years ahead of them to be very productive. And I think, exploring how to incentivize but also encourage senior citizens in Korea to be participating in this, not just encouraging them to, you should go out and start a business, but to be mentors, to the kinds of incentives that could be developed that would help them, maybe start not just any establishment, but maybe those who have expertise in services or technology or other things to remain active and involved and compensated. There's some real, I think, important growth potential from this human expertise and just a part of the population that may not be as engaged in the workforce as it could be, whether by opportunity or also by again some of the rules around retirement ages. I think a second factor, though, is also the services that will support the graying society in Korea. Korea is there's been a lot of focus on some countries in Western Europe and Japan, but Korea's the rate of aging in Korea has actually surpassed those countries and will be accelerating very quickly. And I don't think this is as known outside Korea as it should be. And that also is going to create a lot of opportunities for new services, for new products, to support senior citizens, address their lifestyles. I know this is probably getting into a sensitive topic, but I know that in Korea there's been a lot of discussion about telemedicine, creating services that will enable, for example, people who live in remote communities, and I would assume that many of these, there's probably a proportionally large number of older people than in the cities, but so that they can get routine checkups and consultations with their doctors and medical practitioners without having to travel to hospitals. And for some communities, I would imagine that would be a very long amount of time, and depending on the health condition of people, may be very difficult. So this could be one example of a very interesting area and opportunity for the creative economy in Korea. I also understand that telemedicine is very controversial by medical practitioners and others in Korea. So there's some great opportunities for mentorship, for expertise, for new growth sectors, and I think overcoming some of the barriers to that, be it institutional, be it cultural, are going to be really important. But I think that's what Korea is able to successfully pioneer. Could be something that Korean companies, Korean experts could take outside of Korea's borders to Japan, to Taiwan, to Singapore, even here to the United States as our demographic shift as well.
Yes, in the very back.
My name is Don Kirk. I've spent some time in Korea. Vice President Biden, when he was there recently, called for much more action on opening up markets to motor vehicle imports, agricultural imports. I wonder, he may have been thinking of TPP in general, but I think his remarks were also directed at Korea, since he made the remark in Korea, although he didn't single out Korea by name. I wonder, if there's any prospect for further opening of that market. And speaking of TPP, I got the impression from the recent conference that TPP, as far as Korea was concerned, was just not going to happen. Although I see at the end of your paper, you think it's going to happen. Do you still think it's going to happen? It does not appear to be moving, as far as Korea is concerned, moving anywhere at the moment. Actually, maybe I'm mistaken. Your comment would be much appreciated.
Thank you very much. These are some great and very timely questions. On market opening, the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement was passed in the fall in both countries in the fall of 2011. It was implemented, or the implementation began in March of last year, and so. When the KORUS FTA took effect, many provisions immediately took effect. Others, including some of the tariff lines, have longer phase-out periods, and then some of the non-regulatory measures also will be taking effect over time. One very important one being 2 years after implementation begins, Korea is supposed to move forward with reforms to allow cross-border transfer of data services. This is a very important priority for U.S. business in the KORUS FTA. And this gets into one of a number of areas, including autos and others, where in the initial year and a half that the KORUS FTA has been in effect, there seem to have been some implementation challenges. This is something that Tammy Overby of the U.S. Korea Business Council spoke about recently. The implementation of the provisions of KORUS, as I mentioned, they have some benefits for the broader creative economy agenda, because many of these regulations aren't just beneficial for outside firms, but firms in Korea that also run into some of the regulatory challenges and bureaucracy. But how this links into TPP also is that TPP in many ways builds upon what was accomplished in the KORUS FTA. Many of the goals, certainly of the U.S. business community within the TPP negotiations, reflect what was accomplished in KORUS and hoping to take it the extra mile, taking what was successful and making it even more successful. So in some regards, depending on what happens with TPP, it would seem that it should be fairly simple in many regards for Korea to accede to TPP, just because, again, there's a close linkage conceptually between the two. But in terms of Korea's own entry, there's a couple of factors. One being that for it to be able to join the negotiations, it needs to have all the current participating countries, all 12 economies that are currently in the talks, need to agree that they want Korea to participate. And then there's also the factor, and that's going to take some time, there's also the factor of the state of the TPP negotiations. And of course, the goal had been for the negotiations to conclude this year, hopefully early next year. We'll see what happens. And so does Korea get into the TPP negotiations before they're concluded, or does it accede to TPP at a later date once the agreement has been concluded, and then it would be for Korea and other countries to accept the terms agreed upon? For Korea to join early, it would have a chance to help shape the rules. This won't necessarily happen if Korea doesn't get in before the close of negotiations. So in terms of, will TPP happen? Will Korea get in? I don't think it's a matter of if, but it's a question of timing, and there are many complex factors here. But I would again point to the a lot that's in the KORUS FTA was sort of the model, was the standard, particularly in areas such as intellectual property, that the TPP was built upon. And so, certainly, I think from the perspective of though I don't represent the U.S. business community, just from conversations and my experience with the KORUS process, there are many ways that Korea can be a good partner. But an important part of this is also for Korea to do full and faithful implementation of the agreements it's already committed to, and that's going to have a big factor, I think, in terms of whether stakeholders think that Korea is going to be a good partner in the TPP process.
Yes, right here. To your right. Or sorry.
Hello, Natalie Lovgren with 21st Century Science and Technology. I have a comment about one of your questions, and then a question about Korea's nuclear fusion program. the question that you've raised is, why does Korea need a creative economy? Why does it need an innovation? And I think this was recently invoked by China with their moon landing, because the question came up, why do we go to the moon? Why does China need to go to the moon when there's plenty of problems at home? And it was best answered, a lot of people remember this here, it was best answered by John F. Kennedy when he said, well, why do we go to the moon? Why do we cross the Atlantic? Why do we climb the highest mountain? Why does Rice play Texas? And we do those things because, not just because they're there, but because that's our nature. Creativity is our nature. And I think that creativity is what drives, and innovation is what drives progress in any economy. And because when you push the frontiers of science, you don't know what benefits lie beyond those borders when you push the limits. So I think, if you could comment on that, and then also the fusion program, because the spirit of innovation and creativity is expressed very well in pushing an energy source that would provide energy, could provide energy for thousands of years into the future. That this expresses this principle, but then Korea is one of the 2 countries in the world with an experimental superconducting tokamak, experimental fusion reactor. And they just announced in January that they would not only, that they would build an even larger reactor, the K-demo, alongside the participation in the ITER program. And this is very smart because they're using the participation in the International Fusion Program, the experimental reactor that's being built in France, to then push possibly commercial fusion by 2030, which is the goal. So if you have any comments on either of those things, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. On your first point, I couldn't agree with you more. It's there's just the importance of pursuing knowledge for the sake of knowledge. For why go to the moon? Why cross the ocean? Just the importance of exploration of new knowledge is critically important, and I certainly think that this is Korea has accomplished within 60 years what it's taken many other countries decades, if not centuries, to accomplish. I mean, it's a very incredible story. And President Park, in her inauguration speech, in prefacing the Creative Economy Agenda, spoke about the importance and the need to have a second miracle on the Han River to be achieved through the Creative Economy Agenda. And so, there's been a lot of focus in discussion there about a lot of it centered around information and communication technology. And certainly that's important. And one of the things I hope is that people don't lose sight, be it in the private sector and government, others, about all the other great areas besides information and communication technologies where there could be some great expertise in Korea, and that could have global impact and global implications, not just for economic success, but for broader public goods and other things like that. And I think one of the important things in relation to this too, and thinking about, for example, areas such as global health, other parts where innovation continues to be very important, where there's maybe a lack of innovation in addressing medical solutions to certain diseases that are not common in the developed world anymore, but still a big problem in the developing world. There's increasing work that's going on in this area, starting the Gates Foundation and others. And Korea, beyond being the first recipient of Peace Corps volunteers to have its own equivalent program, also is one of the world's largest and most generous suppliers of overseas development. And so thinking about, the implications of creativity in Korea and how this could, help broader global goals, I think is very exciting to think about that. I'd also note, for those not aware, that Korea does have a space program. They have successfully launched satellites from Korean soil, and so I don't know where Korea will be in getting a lunar lander to the moon, as China has just accomplished. But that's also an area where it'll be interesting to see what Korea does, and also I think important opportunities for partnership, certainly with the U.S. and with other countries involved in space. On nuclear fusion, I'm going to have to defer because it's not, nuclear is not an area I have focused on in particular. But again, this is an area I think that is going to be certainly important for partnership and discussion with the U.S., given the expertise in nuclear research and managing nuclear power here in the United States, and an area that's I know there's still ongoing talks, but as Korea is now looking at global markets itself. With the reactor that's developing in the United Arab Emirates and other areas, partnership is going to be really important. But I would say on the U.S. side, obviously, there's some great research going on here. What might be the opportunities for increasing that high-level basic and other research collaboration with the U.S. towards some really creative solutions in some of these areas?
Yes, right here.
My name is Yuki Imamura of the Washington Strategy Group. So thank you very much for this very interesting issue. And my question is addressed to the issue of the university-industry collaboration for technology commercialization. That includes the human resources, the finance, and maybe the reform of universities, and the industry's view of the universities. Now, in Japan, for instance, where I'm from, has been very much talking about the university-industry collaborations now 15, 20 years. But except few universities in Japan, many of the rather small and the local universities have lacked human resources and consciousness how to utilize these resources if it happens. And I just wonder whether or how the Korean government has any policies to encourage that in terms of their finance or structural encouragement of universities to start their offices for the promotion of these collaborations.
Thank you. Again, it's a very good question, and I have to admit that I haven't focused so much on some of those policies. I know that there has been some study work done on this. There have been certainly efforts over the past couple of decades, I think, to increase the investment and capabilities of regional universities in Korea outside of Seoul. To increase these capabilities and their performance. One of the interesting schools in Korea that I wish I was more familiar with, because I think it's doing interesting things, is the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, or KAIST, which is kind of the MIT of Korea. And it's not based in Seoul, it's based in Daejeon, which was developed over the last 30 years to be a sort of a hub for science and technology and research in Korea. I believe all their courses are actually taught in English. And one thing that they're doing that I think is interesting and could be something for smaller Korean universities to consider is global linkages. I believe there's some established programs in place between KAIST and Georgia Tech. And actually, there seems to be a fair amount of Korea activities at Georgia Tech, interestingly. And for smaller universities, it's one of the things that has come up in discussions in Korea about the university sector is what is the quality of universities? And this is a debate that's been around since the 1990s. Experts like Lin Soo Kim have written extensively about this. And issues of this, there's a large number of universities and the graduation rate is high. But what's the quality? Are there opportunities to really do the research in universities, or is the focus more on teaching? But for those universities that can, I think, make global connections, and not just with the United States, be it with partners in Japan, institutions in Singapore, and others in Asia that have very strong research capabilities, whether science and technology proper or engineering or specific sectors, also the European Union. this could be a very interesting area. I'd love to learn more as to what some of the regional universities and the smaller universities in Korea might be doing along these lines, both public and maybe it's easier for some of the private schools to do this, but both public and private. And I think this is a challenge, as you mentioned, among smaller universities in Japan. So I would think that what Korean universities do that are successful in strengthening these capabilities could be, a great model, great lessons learned that could go beyond Korea's borders. Japan, even the United States and other countries here.
Yeah, Priscilla. Ken, ready.
Hi, Priscilla Beck with Mitsui USA. Just to follow up on that question, has there been any push to try to connect this kind of promotion of innovation with regional development? Because obviously upfront costs and being an entrepreneur in Seoul would be a lot higher than in some of the other surrounding cities or in more rural areas. And I guess the second question is, in terms of this new Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning, what is their role and kind of how, I guess, relevant will they be in terms of their prominence among other ministries and in terms of pushing through Park's agenda?
Thanks again. Two really good questions. While there wasn't a lot of specificity that I have seen in the proposals that were rolled out this summer, the regional development component is in there. It's important. It may not be specified, and it'll be interesting to see how the government moves forward with this. There have been many proposals over the years. I know during the Myung-bak administration, there was talk about the science belt. There have been, over the last few decades, many sort of centers of excellence that have been built up in various clusters that have been started all across Korea. One that I've heard about that I think is actually doing, from some accounts well, is in Osang. I believe it's in Gangwon province. There's a medical technology cluster that's been starting that I think has attracted some foreign investment by large foreign companies, which is one of the goals. So, many of these projects, you can't get results overnight. It's going to take time to build the capabilities and the connections. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with some of these. But I think, what could be done to help create the environment that spurs, creates opportunities in local areas outside of Seoul is going to be really interesting to watch, and hopefully will be a focus of emphasis moving forward. I know there's been discussion about in terms of the public outreach component, which the administration has been speaking about, creative economy towns, a virtual interface, trying to find opportunities to engage the broader public around the country in this agenda, including there's been discussions of, okay, we're going to create centers around the country where people can walk in with their innovative ideas, and we'll connect them with mentors and experts to help to try to do something with that. And, it'll be interesting to see how this how these proposals are institutionalized, or should I say how they become tangible and how they work. But this will be really interesting to watch, and it'll be interesting to see if certain, be it specific provinces or municipalities of any size, including small towns, take the initiative and run with some things, because you find a good model that can be replicated elsewhere, and pretty soon you might have a wildfire. So I think the government certainly has emphasized it, and I think thinking about other discussions, I was reading about maybe 5 or 6 new ministries that have moved to Sejong City, the new administrative capital, about 2.5 hours south of Seoul. And one question that comes to my mind is, as Sejong gets built up, could there be some benefits for innovative activities just because of co-location with the government ministries? So these are some interesting things to think about. On the new Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning, it's an excellent question. The ministry was created out of components of 3 separate ministries. It brought together what had been the former Ministry of Information and Communications, which in turn had also been part of the Ministry of Knowledge Economy under President Lee Myung-bak, with the part of the science part of what had been the Ministry of Education and Science. So the applied research part went in, and The purpose and goal of this new ministry is to be a coordinating entity, a control tower for creative economy policies within the Korean government. But looking back, there's what's going to be interesting to watch is what will the Park administration do to really empower the ministry to the extent possible? And I say that because there's a long history over the last 20 years of ministries being sort of identified or created to be that control tower, the Ministry of Science and Technology back during the Kim Dae-jung administration. And so there have been efforts to have one ministry play the coordinating role, and this is work that overlaps with what all the other ministries do, be it the ministries that, while the names change over the years, those that cover commerce, agriculture, other areas. And that coordination and control tower role has in practice been pretty difficult over the years. Another thing that's been pointed out, I mentioned this in the paper, but that's been pointed out by some scholars, is that just within the last 10 years alone, there's been significant changes to the broader framework of government policy coordination around innovation, science, and technology. First under Kim Dae-jung and then Roh Moo-hyun. But then when President Lee took office, he also reshuffled a number of ministries, created the Ministry of Knowledge Economy, which had a very big role with some of this, and then was trying to reduce the size of government ministries and others. And so this is maybe the third time within the last decade there's been some pretty significant rearrangements and shifts to how the Korean government is structuring policy coordination, and some questions to consider is that when you have these shifts, how do the institutional cultures mix and get along together? How well do they integrate? What's the likelihood that in 4 or 5 years, when President Park's successor takes office, there won't be another change? And so some of the continuity issues I think are going to be these are things I think to be mindful of. In terms of what the role of the ministry is and what it's going to be, able to do. But if it's able to really successfully coordinate with the other ministries, I think that'll be really important. I have noted also the Ministry of Strategy and Finance has been very active, and other ministries too. It's not just I would say it's not just the role of the Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning to do everything with the creative economy. There's a lot of financing issues, and the Financial Services Commission and Ministry of Strategy and Finance have very important roles to play and have been active. The Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy, the Small Business Association, the groups that actually administer many of these programs and initiatives and have the expertise, all these have a critical role. So the ability to really coordinate, reduce redundancies and really bring together good synergies is going to be really important.
Yeah, Julia.
Julia with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I was hoping you could speak a bit about the IP policies in Korea, considering that having a very strong IP regime is probably equally as important to protect the new innovation that comes out of these economic creativity policies. The course has been referred to as having very high standard IP provisions, but I was wondering how far Korea has gone in really strengthening its IP policies.
It's a great question, and with course, what was very interesting is that even before course negotiations started back in 2006, the Korean government was starting to take quite rapid action. I'd say from about 2004-2005 to really address many of the IP protection and enforcement challenges. I remember at that time one of the big issues in U.S.-Korea trade was the screen quota, which was the limitations that in Korea on the showing of foreign films in Korean movie theaters, in part to help nurture and support Korea's domestic film industry. And about 10 years ago, of course, the Hallyu the Korean wave was sending ripples across Asia, and Korean films were winning many prestigious international film festival awards and doing quite well. And yet also around that time, the the producers, the companies making the films were running into huge problems because illegal downloading was cutting into their profits. And so, and not just the content industry, Korean manufacturers have been severe victims of IP infringement in China, all across Asia. I remember seeing once an image of a completely counterfeit Hyundai Santa Fe that had shown up somewhere, at least very large parts of it were. And so there was a lot of work that was being done even before Chorus started. But Chorus, I know that from the industry perspective, people were very pleased with the provisions, very high standard, some would say gold standard provisions. And then there's the provisions, but there's also the enforcement category. And I think that's what we're going to see as Chorus implementation moves forward. But outside of Chorus as well, for example, Korea did something I think the U.S. has not done yet, which was to institute a 3 strikes law around things like illegal downloading. France is another country that had done this. And so, I think I've not been following enforcement, but I think that's going to be a key thing. There are many strong rules in place, both inside and outside of Chorus. The enforcement's going to be, what's going on with the enforcement, and is it effective? And that's going to be important to watch. It's specific to the creative economy agenda. One thing that really caught my eye in a good way is there is a lot of discussion about the importance of IP protection and enforcement in these broad, even in the broader plans that were put out earlier this year, without maybe all the specifics haven't been worked out yet. And these include the importance of ensuring proper return on investment for intellectual property, promoting patenting, and in particular also ensuring that working to strengthen the IP and patent regime for small and medium enterprises. That being that sometimes there may be cases where there are a lot of IP violations that can really damage their ability to monetize their ideas and new technologies. So I think moving forward, what's going to be a really critical factor for the success of the creative economy agenda, but also this completely overlaps into bilateral and multilateral trade agreements, is with these very strong laws that are their enforcement, and then as implementation enforcement happens, if some things aren't working out, just the ability to go in there and take action. But I think it's a really important topic that I think deserves a lot of attention as we watch things moving forward.
Well, Sean, I'd like to thank you. This has been a very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
I think, there's a lot of components to this, and you've done a really good job of sort of putting the pieces out there. And it's interesting to see how over the next 4 or 5 years this all develops. If you'll join me in thanking Sean.